Please subscribe to my channel to learn more about political philosophy. So I want to talk about what's in this book, The Malaise of Modernity by Charles Taylor, which a friend of mine, Spencer, put me onto several years ago. I read it. I was kind of discombobulated about it at the time, but actually as I'm reading it again, it makes a lot of sense. I just want to read from the back cover so you get an idea immediately of what this book is about and why you probably should pay attention to it. It says, in The Malaise of Modernity, Taylor focuses on the key concept of self-fulfillment, modern concept, often attacked as the central support of what Christopher Lasch has called the culture of narcissism. Taylor approaches the question more cautiously. He recognizes that the impulse towards self-fulfillment is often expressed in self-centered ways, but argues that it is not simply a turning away from traditional values and social commitment. The impulse also reflects something authentic and valuable in modern culture. Only by distinguishing what is good in this modern striving from what is socially and politically dangerous, Taylor says, can our age be made to deliver its promise. Okay, so that gives you some clue as to how this fits in with my concerns, the concerns that have been discussed on this channel for quite some time now. This book, again, is called The Malaise of Modernity. So malaise means a sense of anxiety and worry, a sense of loss. He says that we sense that we have lost something important in modern society, that even we sense that we may be in decline, even though in a sense we live in a world of perpetual progress when it comes to things like science and technology. But there continues to be a mood of anxiety, and that's even before all the latest crises, a mood that not all is well. It's been going back to at least the beginning of the 20th century. As technology has advanced at a quicker and quicker pace, and as capitalism has transformed, oftentimes we feel as though we have no choice but to go forward, and Taylor addresses that sense of no choice. But part of the reason we say we cannot but go forward is because we don't want to go backwards, because we know and we think maybe the alternative is to go backwards, and we know that we didn't live all that well in the past. And people who look at the past often do so romantically, but if we look at it with clear eyes, there's a lot to be thankful for in our modern world. So Taylor is going to discuss in the first part of this book the three elements that lead to this sense of malaise, this sense of anxiety and loss. The first one is individualism and a subsequent loss of meaning. He says that on the one hand, with the development of individualism, people seem freed from the strictures of authority, and that this is felt to be good. I want to emphasize the word authority there because I want to trace this concept of authority throughout this particular video and maybe even continue thinking this way throughout this reading of the book. We thought that we were freed from the strictures of authority, for instance, during the Protestant Reformation or during the Enlightenment, and what came after. There was this rebellion against authority. One price that we paid for that rebellion against authority, which in many ways was good because it allowed people more freedom to develop themselves as individuals, but one of the prices that we paid is a sense of disorientation because we were freed from old moral orders, a sort of sense of cosmic order that came with it, that we have not been able to get back, that sort of sense that everything is in place, everything's the way it should be in the world. Now, some of that was false, some of it was misleading, but we lost this sense, and we haven't been able to regain it, and so modernity came with a certain disorienting, even nauseous feeling. And this is what he calls the crisis of meaning. We lost the old meaning, and maybe in some ways that was good, but we have not reached any consensus on what should provide human life meaning. There are many people who answer this in different ways, but even in their answers, they are less certain than they would have been before. Tocqueville, for instance, called this loss a type of mediocrity, that the modern person had lost any sense of aspiring to something greater than themselves, honor, the heroic. Kierkegaard, according to Taylor, says that we lost our passion, our drive. And Nietzsche, of course, is famous for saying that modern human beings have become last men, little more than insects, unable to have any grand vision or purpose, and in need of some sort of total renewal, which is where the Superman concept would come into play. We needed to kind of overcome ourselves and renew ourselves somehow. So all three of those philosophers express this malaise, this sense that there's something deeply wrong. The second emanation of this that increases the sense of loss and anxiety is instrumental reason and what Taylor calls the eclipse of ends, as not having ends. That goes along with the first point, right? Once the old order or authority seemed to disappear, okay, I'm going to add the word seemed because authority never disappeared, okay? But once a particular type of authority disappeared, maybe the church, maybe the authority of the church and the authority of the aristocracy, let's say, everything seemed to be up for grabs. And one of the effects of that was that human beings discovered, and this is something McCarraher talks about in the development of Protestantism in the United States, everything being up for grabs allowed people to think more clearly about using anything and everything, including other human beings, in an instrumental way to achieve certain purposes. So Taylor writes here, once the creatures that surround us, I might add, including human beings, lose the significance that accrued to their place in the chain of being, they're open to being treated as raw materials or instruments for our projects. So here's where, we lose the old authority, but we then created the grounds for a new and maybe not any better and potentially worse authority in the process of the rebellion. In instrumental rationality, everything gets run through a cost-benefit analysis. Taylor says even things that really a cost-benefit analysis can't apply to, like maybe the human soul or, human flourishing and what brings it about, aesthetics, and things like this. He says, for instance, the ways the demands of economic growth are used to justify very unequal distributions of wealth and income would be an example of this cost-benefit analysis. Or the way these same demands make us insensitive to the needs of the environment, even to the point of potential disaster. So the implication there is that, to treat human beings and the environment in which we live in a very instrumental way is not only wrong in the sense that you're applying the wrong tool to fix a problem or to make things better, but you're also actually creating conditions inadvertently that may make life much worse, right? So is the case with the CAFOs here, the concentrated animal feeding operations, where we've managed to, make enough beef for an awful lot of people to eat way too much of it. But in the meantime, we've created an incredible amount of pollution. We have meat that's not as healthy to eat because it's chock full of antibiotics, and human bovine growth hormones that can affect human beings. So we created a problem in the name of pursuing great efficiency, in other words. The primacy of instrumental reason is also evident, he says, in the prestige, authority again, and aura that surrounds technology and makes us believe that we should seek technical solutions even when something very different is called for. So, yes, for sure, we put our sense of authority into technology. We do treat it as though it can solve any problems. And Taylor is asking us to pause and really realize what we're doing there in the same way, sort of similar way that McCarraher asked us to think about the way that we worship it, right? That we treat it almost like a god. So it becomes, as Jacques Ellul pointed out a long time ago, instrumental reason as autonomous authority, a sort of self-moving authority that we bow to. As an example, again, of this is a manure lagoon outside of a CAFO. A manager, in spite of her own orientation, may be forced by the conditions of the market to adopt maximizing strategies she feels is destructive. When you have to comply with market forces or basically die as an economic entity, that you are no longer in charge. But is that inevitable? Taylor, and this is the hopeful thing that I find and why I wanted to read Taylor again, is he does not think so. A lot of our philosophers observe these. I mean, it's not like these points I've been making through Taylor are new, but they observe them and they tend to almost, feel that Nietzschean nausea of no return, unless some, incredible miracle happen, we're just going down. We're going to go down this road until we're the Borg or something like this. And Charles Taylor says our degrees of freedom are not zero. So he's pushing back and he's saying we are not enslaved to this new authority, though we act as though we are. He says there is a point to deliberating what ought to be our ends and whether instrumental reason ought to have a lesser role in our lives than it does. And this is exactly what I've been asking for and what I want to do, which is to truly think about our ends, not to allow our means to dictate to us, but to think about what we really want, what would really make us happy, and then to use our prodigious abilities in technology, science, and other areas, human organization, to obtain those things. And this ought to be intimately linked up with democratic participation. That's what the political sphere is for, and this is what Charles Taylor says. He says, yes, you can ponder this issue of, choice on the individual level. Like in our modern world, that might be, I just guess I won't use social media or whatever I won't use plastic anymore, whatever it is that you decide to do. That's obviously not enough. It's good. It shows that it's a sort of rebellion against authority. It's a rebellion that says I'm a free human being, so it's good. And once you practice these things, probably mainly because it reminds you that you are not simply a part of this larger system, but you are a unique individual with a will. But he says not only should we do that, but we do need the political. The political arena is something that it seems like a lot of people are giving up on. And another reason I wanted to return to Taylor is because Taylor does not want to give up on it. I have a picture of Paul Rahe's book, Soft Despotism, Democracy's Drift. If you want to learn more about Tocqueville's concept of soft despotism, which Taylor draws from quite a bit, that's a great book by Paul Rahe that deals with Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Tocqueville and this modern, what Taylor calls malaise, or the modern dilemma. So the third problem that Taylor deals with in the introductory here is the problem of soft despotism and the loss of freedom. And he follows Tocqueville very closely here, saying that we as atomistic individuals that we have become enclosed in our own hearts, right? Feeling powerless to combat instrumental reason, to submit and have to submit to this immense tutelary power, right? The immense tutelary power that he's talking about, or at least what Tocqueville was talking about, was primarily the growth in government and also the growth in a type of economy that designs, our behavior, kind of dictates our behavior. And this indeed, I'm sure Charles Taylor is thinking of, but also we can include in this, the authority of the expert, right? More generally, the expert, which pervades the government as well as the corporate sphere. The bureaucrat is the expert, the manager, right? And more, we are in danger of losing political control over our destiny to the system itself, to the way it has become more and more automated, to where, most of us today talk about, well, they did this and they did that. We have no idea who they are, but we do have a sense that they, well, whoever these experts are in the various fields of our existence, are more in charge than we are. And even they, though, and this is the great irony, are largely dictated to, like, by the instrumental reason, the system that's developed around it. And yes, now we have to worry about artificial intelligence as kind of like the ultimate expression of that. Again, even with artificial intelligence, it doesn't have to be all bad. The fear that we have about artificial intelligence is that it will get out from under our control. And there's every evidence to believe that it might get out of our control because we've let everything else get out of our control. Let's face it, right? So Charles Taylor is asking us to, really contemplate now, to have that long overdue discussion about how we want to deal with this stuff. What do we want it for? What can we use it for that will not lead to our destruction and the destruction of our environment, but rather to all that is really promised by it? So I'll leave you with this last quote. And I have cakes in the, because I've been thinking in terms of ingredients lately and all the ingredients that we have. Everybody should do an inventory personally of what ingredients they have and decide what can be baked with them. And our society has an incredible amount of ingredients. And right now, those ingredients aren't being used to make little cakes that are healthy and don't make us fat, but give us a lot of pleasure, but rather big, nasty, ugly cakes. Okay? Like the one in the second Borat film that recently came out. Big, ugly cakes that make us fat and give us heart attacks and aren't particularly pretty. So Taylor says, basically, we need to learn how to bake our cake and eat it too and make sure that it actually is tasty and good for us. He says, there is in fact both much that is admirable and much that is debased and frightening in all of the developments that I've been describing. But to understand the relation between the two is to see that the issue is not how much of a price and bad consequences you have to pay for the positive fruits. That's where we're at now. Like, we have to pay for it with pollution, with poverty, with automation. Social welfare is a necessity because people are thrown out of work. Okay? So he's saying, the issue is not how much of a price in bad consequences you have to pay for the positive fruits, but rather how to steer these developments towards their greatest promise and avoid the slide into debased forms. We're totally in the slide to debased forms, right? So he is asking the question that I want to ask as well, and which I want to have more and more conversations about. What can we do? We need to break free of this idea that we can only do a certain set of things. And we're just marching down the road into, the oblivion of whatever systems we have created. We are the creators of those systems. And so the question now is, what are we going to do with those ingredients? Are we up to the task of actually harnessing the forces that we have ourselves put into existence? So I'm very excited to start in on this book. It's really not very big. It's like 120 pages long. So I'd highly recommend if you haven't read any Charles Taylor before, start here. And I plan to spend the next maybe 3 or 4 sessions on this book. All right. See you next time.